Hey folks, welcome to the Encuentros Latinx podcast, where we explore stories of spirituality, identity, and culture from Latinx perspectives. My name is Taylor Ramage. I'm an author and editor, and I'm Puerto Rican. This podcast is a project of Encuentros Latinx, an LGBTQ plus ministry in the United Church of Christ. I am very excited to bring you today's guest, Amparo Ortiz. Amparo is the author of a young adult fantasy book called Blaze Wrath Games, which is about a Puerto Rican girl who aims to play in an international competition with dragons, and she ends up embroiled in an international conspiracy. It's a very, very good book, and you'll get to hear some of it at the very end of the episode. The sequel, Dragon Blood Ring, is coming out in October, so be sure to look for that. Be sure to pre-order it. Pre-orders are very, very important for authors. In true Puerto Rican fashion, we had a very long conversation, starting with memories of old San Juan and the fan fiction she wrote about the nuns in her Catholic school. And then we went into how much of the real world artists should use for inspiration. If cat person means anything to you, that's what we talk about. If not, you'll just have to listen to find out. We also had a great discussion about religious iconography and grace and forgiveness in the age of social media. And then we brought it all home with a discussion about her current and upcoming work and Latinx identity in Blaze Wrath Games. Find the most comfortable couch at your TT's house because we are not leaving this party for a long, long while. Let's get right into this encuentro. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Can you introduce us by giving us your name and pronouns?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amparo Ortiz. My pronouns are she, her.
Amazing. And what country or countries do you and your family come from?
I'm from Puerto Rico, and my parents are both from Puerto Rico, but they've both lived in the United States as young children. I've never lived outside of Puerto Rico. I have traveled a lot, but I've always been here mainly.
Cool. And what is a good memory that you have about growing up in Puerto Rico?
So many. I know it's strange to say that. We're currently trying to survive a pandemic, but even within this very, very heinous time in our lives, I have had some great memories. I launched my debut novel last year, a little bit later in the year, October 2020. But before that, I feel like being in this country has meant a lot of ups and downs simply because, and this is going to sound really vain, simply because of the weather. So I know that a lot of people love tropical climate because they don't live in tropical climates. So most of my memories revolve around warmth, and they revolve around being outside, being with my friends, being with my family, or being by myself as a very brooding teenager, right? But for the most part, my memories, the ones that stick out the most as formative or that have led me to who I am today, they always involve people who core friendships, because they have always helped me notice or understand that I am an artist. And sometimes it's difficult to see that support, specifically coming from a Latinx community. I don't want to generalize, but for the most part, artistic endeavors aren't entirely supported. And my parents do support that side of me. It's a little bit different for them to conceptualize it fully, but you know, once they see a book in your hands, they're like, oh, it's a real thing, or they see a book cover, they're like, oh, it's a real thing. So my favorite memories here in Puerto Rico are just me, Old San Juan, which is one of my favorite places. We walk around, we fool around, but we also wear our hearts on our sleeves, and we talk about our dreams, and we talk about things that we would like to do, things that we would like to accomplish, but seem impossible or improbable. And there's something magical about being at night, wandering around the streets of Old San Juan that feel to me like it's peak Puerto Rican behavior. So, I mean, you can see a lot of people in other parts of this country, just like the beaches or just cobblestone streets elsewhere. But, or they maybe they go to like a museum and hang out there, or they go to a mall and hang out at the mall, which are kind of normal, common experiences throughout the world or around the world. But in my case, there's something very specific about walking Old San Juan, or even just knowing that you're going to Old San Juan. It's kind of a magical experience for me. Like, let's bare our souls to each other. It's just really, it's strange, but it's essentially what I love the most about being here.
Yeah, I haven't been to Old San Juan in a couple of trips to Puerto Rico, so it's been a while since I've last been there, but it is such a different vibe because it's so it's so old. I mean, not to
it's so old.
I'm a writer. I have words.
We have words in our brains.
But just the hills are so steep. That's one thing that just really stands out in my mind. It's like it's just this up and down, really dramatic landscape or cityscape. And I mean, most buildings in Puerto Rico are colorful, like people's houses and things like that, more so than in the United States for sure. But Old San Juan is like everything is colorful. All the buildings are colorful. And so it does feel like a special place to go there. So being that, you know, you are born and raised in Puerto Rico, I can speak.
Yes.
And what is your sort of experience of Latinx identity and just like that term? Because it has such a complex, you know, development and usage. And so what is your experience of that terminology?
It's interesting because it's a loaded question, and it's also like a very simple to answer question at the same time. Historically speaking, Puerto Rico is a US colony, and it's interesting to talk to people who are diaspora, whether they were born and raised in the United States or they've lived in Puerto Rico and then they left as adults or as teenagers because their family moved away or they choose to move away for work or other reasons. I feel like being a Puerto Rican who has never lived outside of Puerto Rico is a case in itself, and diaspora is a case in itself. So for me, as someone who's always lived here, being Latina for me has meant speaking Spanish as my first language, historically, culturally, but at the same time not. But the language itself is not what makes it so complex. It's everything tied to that language, because it is very much for me a war of the worlds, because you want to feel like you belong in your own community and you have things to discuss with other people here, whether it's politics or anything revolving around even what your family thinks of you, what your family thinks of your choices. Those things, you know, it's tied to language in the sense that, well, we talk in Spanish or we speak in Spanish, but some of us think in English. And that's my main problem. Like, I can speak in Spanish. It's my first language in terms of where I was born. But in terms of how I express myself, sometimes it does get really, I feel guilty. So I feel like my identity has been laced with guilt throughout my entire life because I learned English first, in the sense that I interacted with English more. And then once I got to kindergarten, I was able to communicate with people my age in Spanish. I would mostly just communicate with my parents and my little brother in Spanish, but not enough. I would always speak in English. So my identity is associated with guilt, in the sense that I don't feel like I am as self-aware as I should be. I am as tied to my culture as I should be. But at the same time, my culture is an amalgam. Is that what I'm saying? Amalgam? I don't know how, like a collection?
Amalgam.
Yeah, we're both
No,
like
I know this
stumped.
word.
Like a collection of
Yeah.
different experiences that not necessarily, I didn't have a choice in them. I was born in a country where we have a very, I want to say the word interesting, history with two empires, being Spain and US, these empires. And so it's interesting because I personally don't feel that connection to Spain. I do feel a connection in terms of the pop culture aspects and the language with the US, and that's it. But in terms of like the rest of my identity outside of what language and pop culture are, I feel like I have spent most of my life wondering whether I fit in at all with certain communities, or not communities, certain groups of people, because most people that I hang out with nowadays as an adult are the one, or not hang out, we're in a pandemic, but the people that I interact with and that are my friends, those are the people that I have spent my entire life searching for and waiting for. I feel like I finally found the people that I was meant to be friends with. And it's taken that long because I grew up in a very small town in the northeastern coast of Puerto Rico, which is where I still live. I actually went to private school all my life, and then by 10th grade, I moved to a public school. But the community was similar. Like in the private school sphere, you would see a lot of elitism, you would see a lot of favoritism and colorism. And then in the public school system, you would see a lot of like elbowing away people who didn't necessarily live like you. Like there's a lot of contests in that sense of like, I've lived a harder life than you, like prove yourself. Why should I pay attention to you? And it's as a teenager who thinks, movies and books are cool, it's really hard. And theater, I was a theater geek I was in drama for 10th and 11th grades. So it was really hard because people were very interested in partying and people were very interested in just having a social life. And I was very much interested in just being an introvert, hanging out with myself and my dog. So it took me a long time to get to the point where I found the people that I was supposed to be around and just accepting myself for who I was as well. And that's where those conversations and those beautiful memories of Lord San Juan come up, because it was through those friendships that I realized who I was. And none of my friends, now that I think about it, well, actually, like very few of my friends are also artists in the sense that they either illustrate or they write or they play music, they write music, etc. But most of my friends are like psychologists and lawyers. So it's just like really weird to conflate everything with each other. But yeah, I feel like it's been a long journey. But my identity has always shifted and I've always resisted a lot about it. Nowadays, like if someone is like, oh, you're not Latina enough, you have to prove yourself. I'm like, I don't have to prove anything to you. But growing up, I did feel like I was left out of a lot, and like conversations, references weren't hitting in my head. They were like I wasn't understanding everything. Like expressions, like our refrains or the idioms, the idiomatic expressions here. Sometimes I would be like, I have no idea you just said. So language always comes back to identity for me. But yeah, it's mainly that.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me to hear you share that, because I feel like, well, number one, are you Latinx enough litmus test, it's really pervasive, and it's something that like I internalize a lot, and I use that to invalidate myself for a lot of my life.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because within that framework that I feel like I internalized, somebody like you who is born and raised there, and you speak English and Spanish, like you pass the litmus test, so to speak. So it's just right. Like we're, being quote unquote right here. But it's just very interesting that like, even you felt this sense of like not being enough. And I think that just points to how ridiculous that whole attitude even is.
Yeah.
And how, you know, you mentioned guilt as being a major thing that you deal with. And I think so many of us deal with guilt, especially around language that we know or don't know, history that, I mean, I find myself like every time I learn a new thing about Puerto Rico or history or like a language or a religious practice or whatever, I'm like, I'm really glad that I know this, but also I feel so bad that I'm a grown adult and I didn't
Yeah.
have exposure to this, and it's like feels fake that I'm like going
Right.
that I like, you know, am connecting with it, what, you know, whatever it is. And it feels like even if I go and I learn, do a deep dive into XYZ, that I find out about, that it's still like not valid because it wasn't part of my formative years.
Right.
And that's such a, I don't know if anybody else like gets that way about identity, where it feels like the things that happen in your formative years, or the places you are, the whatever, seem to lend credibility with like what you can claim or not claim.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just me that thinks that sometimes that's an attitude that either we like consciously or unconsciously adopt, or if that's like more widespread. But it's like, it's almost like as an adult figuring stuff out, it almost like feels fake if you're going to try to reconnect with something, although it shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
You should be able to reconnect with anything at any age. But I don't know, what do you think about that? Do you think that's a thing, or am I just like making stuff up?
No, I mean, we make stuff up as writers, but that's not a made up thing at all. And I feel like it's interesting you say, oh, you pass a litmus test and you still feel this way. Like that's, you know, or when you're trying to identify or pinpoint, where am I lacking? And then you have to realize, who am I lacking to? Like, am I lacking to the people at large, as we say, like the community at large? Or am I lacking to myself? Am I lacking to my parents? Am I lacking to my siblings, my partners, my partner, my friends? Who am I lacking to? To the institutions, the academic institutions, or whatever it is that is the governing powers that be, right? So I feel like there's so much that you can ask yourself, and you will always find something that is lacking about yourself if you're comparing at all times. But there's no way to stop comparing. You always have to say, okay, well, this person is this and they've accomplished this, or they know this, they're great at that. Like, those are things that we're aware of. We can't shut that off. So I feel like it's interesting to have to think about the ways in which we alienate ourselves and others alienate us. So it's a constant battle between what is accepted and what is not accepted, but within our own minds and within our own sense of mental peace and spiritual peace. It's hard because me personally, I feel like I'm a teacher, I'm an ESL college professor. So sometimes my students will be like, if they're meeting me for the first time, they'll be like, oh, professor, are you American? And I'm like, I mean, we're all Latin American. But what do you mean? Do you mean I'm from the state? Am I from the United States? And they're like, yes. I'm like, why? And I'm like, and they're like, oh, because you speak English like an American. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, because Americans speak English in a myriad of ways. And also they associate accents with knowledge, or with mastery, I should say. And it's something that I always have to be like aware of, that not everyone is going to understand my sense of humor. I know we were talking about this earlier. Not everyone is going to understand my sense of humor. They're not going to understand what I write sometimes, what I text sometimes. And it's interesting that those differences will happen regardless of language. But at the same time, the experiences that everyone has direct access to inform how they understand certain things about you as a person. And sometimes they don't mean ill. They don't really mean to be ignorant of your particular experiences. But for example, I feel like I'm an empath. Like, I feel like I want to know the lives of everyone around me. I ask a lot of questions. I'm always listening. So it's just like, it's natural for me to know about others, but then when it comes to me connecting with them in a sense that, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, that's where it gets a little bit trickier, because I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I fully respect what you're talking about because I don't know that part of Puerto Rico, or I'm not familiar with these specific experiences, but we're all Puerto Rican. You know, we're all living in the same country, or we're all under the same banner, so to speak. So, yeah.
So, what experiences do you have with spirituality or religion? What were the traditions or institutions that maybe shaped you as a young person? And then how have you grown or shifted spiritually or religiously?
Well, that's really interesting for me because I know I spoke about guilt earlier when it comes to me being like, oh, I don't feel Puerto Rican enough.
Right.
But I feel like I personally grew up secular, but when I went into, I think it was first grade, my kindergarten was like a public school, but my first grade was a private school that was Catholic. So in that specific year, it meant nuns and just like highly monitored at all times kind of learning. So it was interesting because we did have a dress code. We have uniforms here in Puerto Rico for the most part. I know that in the United States, there's a big difference for me because when you look at television shows, for example, or movies, you see high schools without uniforms, like public high schools without uniforms. But here in Puerto Rico, even public schools have uniforms. So it's interesting for me, like that's one difference, right? And then when you're going into the private school sphere, you see way more restrictions when it comes to dressing these uniforms up. And so I always grew anxious growing up, specifically in my middle school years, because that's when I realized that, oh, boys aren't that bad. I kind of like them. I mean, I always knew that boys were okay, but not to the point where I was like, I see my future with this random person that just walked in front of me and I'm never going to speak to them again. So middle school was an interesting time in my life because as someone who was raised Catholic, but not at home, I was raised Catholic in school. And so sometimes when I encounter now to this day as an adult, when I encounter people or speak to people who are not Catholic, but they're not necessarily part of any other religion that I would consider completely different from Catholicism, I am in shock hearing their experiences because I'm like, that is not how I grew up at all. And that is not how I was like raised to honor God and honor myself. Because those were two very different distinctions in my head. I'm like, I'm happy, but is God happy? So I feel like that was the main question growing up. I'm like, I believe in God, and to this day I do believe in God. I don't go to church. I don't specifically belong to the Catholic Church anymore, but I don't necessarily belong to any other church, but I am a spiritual person. So I pray every day, for example, but I know people who have stayed within the Catholic Church and are very much progressive. They don't abide by all the rules, but they go to church on Sunday. They do all of the things that mark them as Catholics. But it's interesting because they know that they're not being fully accepted, and they still attend service and they still try to be as participative as possible. And so in my case, as I was growing up, in elementary school specifically, I grew up thinking that the 10 Commandments were actual law. I grew up thinking that certain things about specific saints or specific figures within the Bible were actual, like, faithful historical documentation. And of course, everything is up for interpretation. And I didn't really understand that until I was much older. Of course, you have things that truly happened and that were documented. But at the same time, it baffles me how people will reinterpret things to fit what they believe is the truth. And I saw a lot of that growing up. I saw a lot of abuse of power from our teachers, from my peers, just a lot of discrimination, specifically towards members of our, or not members, but classmates that were maybe just not entirely believing what they were being told and what they were being raised to believe. So it was a very stressful time in my life, elementary school and middle school, just because I was always aware that we were being watched. And I was always aware that we had to behave in a specific way. You're a lady, you have to carry yourself with respect. You don't say curse words. You don't flip anyone off, which is my instinct all the time.
And now you do all those things. So
right. It's like, well, the Catholic Church failed me. So I feel like just the way that, and I notice a trend in this specific conversation. It all comes back to language. I am a very expressive person in Spanish. In English, I tend to have a little bit more of a straightforward kind of way of expressing myself. But in Spanish, I can kind of go in circles, and usually I don't express myself in like as I intend immediately, because I'm thinking a lot. And that's kind of a result or a product of growing up in that specific environment. And then to get, slut shamed by your peers. I wasn't personally slut shamed, but I saw that so much. Like, if I am bothered by misogyny, specifically coming from cis men or cis boys, it infuriates me even more to see other people support it and other people reenact things that should never be repeated, or say things that should never be said, believe things that shouldn't be believed, hate in general. But also it's not just the church itself. It's the fact that I come from a very small town, and these are people who are not forward thinking. They're not looking to make the world a better place. They're looking to make the world, or keep the world the way it is, because it benefits them. So it was just coupled with that. And then when I left my middle school to go to high school, it was a public school. So there was no pressure in terms of, I never felt like I was being watched, although my father was a teacher at the same school. So I did know that I was going to technically be watched, but not to the same degree. That says a lot when you know your father is not going to be that aware of what you're doing, but the nuns are. It's like the nuns are always watching. But
the nuns know everything.
The nuns know everything. I mean, honestly, I envy that ability to be like a hawk, But also, I just feel like there were a lot of, and sometimes I would pass the time when I was bored with my friends. I would write what I call it now, fan fiction, like of the lives of our teachers, or like the nuns who lived in the school, like fan fiction before they became nuns, who were like, I wonder what their lives were like, because they were very private people. They would never like say much about themselves. We didn't really get to know them that well. And then it was just like, well, I wonder who she was before. And we would make up these ridiculous, outlandish stories about adventures, like Mordor type adventures, like Lord of the Rings type stuff. And I guess I should have known by then that I was meant to write, but I attributed that to being bored. I was like, well, I don't want to be here right now. I hate math. Let's pretend my teacher slays dragons, And I'm like, that's a more interesting life than what I'm currently living through. So
that is completely relatable. And now I'm just taken with this idea of
the dragon slaying nuns,
nun fanfic, nun fanfiction, and just because the whole cat person thing. I mean, you've seen that. Have you seen that going around on Twitter?
Yes, I read that. I'm like, I'm sad about that actually.
Okay. Now people. Yeah. Now I'll set the context so that people can understand what we're talking about. Basically, there was this short story that was published in the New Yorker in 2017, and it was published at the height of the Me Too movement. Like that was really, coming into consciousness at that time. Yeah. And so this short story was about a 20-year-old woman who gets into a relationship with like a 34-year-old man, and it mostly describes their sex life, but then some of the details about the main character, such
Property,
as the
where they
small
live.
town that she lives in, the college she went to, the movie theater that she worked in. Turns out the author of the short story lifted those details from an actual person that, like, both of these two women, like, separately at different times, were in a relationship with the same man who is the real life version of the man in the short story that was published. And so I guess a few days ago, this essay got published, and I don't remember offhand the magazine, but I read the essay, and it was the real person who read this short story and said, these really specific, weird, random details of my life are in this story, and I don't know this author.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? And then eventually she finds out that the author, like, that they kind of knew each other, but not knew each other directly, but through like a mutual connection through this guy, this man, and that the author had like found the woman's social media, or searched through or picked up enough of this woman's life so where like
gosh.
other people were like is this you?
Yeah. That's
like,
the
not in the
worst
funny
part.
Twitter way, is this you, but like in the actual like are you
did you do
and
this?
basically it's raising this huge conversation about just the ethics of authors doing the whole verisimilitude thing.
Yeah.
And it's sparking a lot of concerns about, how much authors actually pull from real life. And I mean, I can't speak for anyone but myself. Like, for me personally, I really don't base a lot of characters or situations off of real things.
Same.
Even my longer contemporary stuff still has enough of a speculative element where it's like I feel like I'm writing, at least at the very least an alternative world of our own, and not like truly this world. But then it's a cliche because people who are not writers or authors, I'll be like, yeah, I'm an author, and you'll get that joke of like, are you going to base a character off of me? Like, yeah, it's like I feel like, and part of my reaction to that is, I almost want to say that it's an overblown stereotype of like people think that authors just put real people in their books all the time.
Yeah.
And I want to say that that's really not what happens most of the time. But then, this happens. Yeah, this situation occurs, and I'm like, I still don't really think it happens as often as people are now worried that it does because of this situation. But
also, it's
so I guess it's a good thing that you never published your fanfic about the nuns,
fanfic,
because they would have found out.
Like, oh no, this girl is problematic. We knew it. But I feel like in that specific case, it just it's problematic for a lot of reasons, but mostly when the term inspiration means to be literally take something from something else and turn it into something that feels new, or like you're creating something based on something else. But what this person is doing is actually copying, which is not inspiring, or being inspired by. So I feel like the laziness is just really evident. And also there's an obsessive quality to it that I feel like people tend to romanticize a lot of problematic behavior, whether it's in fiction or in art in general. So I feel like saying, it's very good that you say it like that, though you're like, oh, this is happening, because people will be like, well, isn't that what authors do? But then it's like, no, that's not what authors do, actually. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're just supposed to like transform reality into our version of the truth. But it's not supposed to make someone else the focal point when they exist, and they used to date someone you also dated. I mean, I don't know about you, Taylor. I personally have no interest in anyone who's ever dated someone I dated. It's like, what is going on? I don't understand. This is weird.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the cliche that lesbians are all friends with their exes,
right.
I don't associate with anybody
I don't associate
that
with
I've
them.
been. I don't associate with anybody that I used to know, as the Gote song tells us.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
And it's not even necessarily like because something bad happened. It's just that we lose touch. I mean, I say that, but then there are like a couple of people who are genuinely like cool, and I'm still connected with them on social media or whatever, and that's fine. But then there are most individuals. If it's been like one, if it's been like one or two Tinder dates or OkCupid dates, it's not like I'm usually open to being friends with somebody. It really takes a lot for somebody to cross my boundaries enough to be like, I truly don't want to associate with you.
Absolute same.
But I would never base a character or like a plot entirely off of even my most wildest experience that I've had with dating in terms of a person who is truly very toxic. I'm not going to put that person directly in a book, or that experience like beat for beat in a book or a story.
Yeah.
Mostly because I don't want to relive it in that way, so to speak, but also because just as a human being, I still don't want or need that person years from now, like assuming that I become very famous and everybody's paying attention, to my work. I don't need that person to read something and be like, oh, like, she put me in there, so she was really thinking about me a lot, and so maybe I should go text her. Like,
I mean,
or in this case too, or like, somebody who's just an innocent random person, feels like their specific life was just copied and lifted. And here's the thing, like, this author didn't, some of the easiest details to change, like the place that she worked at and the hometown, like these things that really don't take that much effort to change weren't changed. And I don't want to sound like elitist or anything, or say that in order to be a writer or an author you should have formal education, but I feel like I got my undergrad degree in English with a concentration on creative writing, and so in a more like formal academic institution I was taking writing courses. And even aside from that, like, I was still paying attention to everything on the internet and like blog posts and just industry stuff. And it's like, this is 101. This is author ethics 101. Like, this, if this person, this author, I think, was she in an MFA program? I don't want to mix up the details. I don't want to mix up the details and like say the wrong thing, but just even if you take like a writing workshop from like a random whatever, like, this is still a very basic topic that's covered in terms of like, you don't copy beat for beat every single detail of somebody's life. What you do is you take the hometown one person is from, and your mom's favorite food, and your best friend from middle school's like, the time in third grade that she ate a roly-poly, and you put that you put that together. Like, and then
I think it's because
that's like a new person.
I think I think it's a lot of people are really like very much relating to artists like Olivia Rodrigo, like Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran. They all have biographical work, but it's different because they're talking about themselves. And in this case, you're talking about someone you don't even know. Like, it's so creepy to me. It's like, if I find out that someone is writing a book about my life, first of all, my life is not that interesting. So the fact that you've been checking my Instagram or like whatever it is, I'm like, that's weird. Isn't it weird? Like, that's weird.
Yeah, it's so anyway, that's the book Twitter discourse for this week. But by the time this comes out, there are going to be like 5 more things that have happened.
It's like it's an ongoing debate machine, and I love it. But I will talk about
You
my nun slash fiction, or not slash, fan fiction,
yes.
so that people
Yes,
will be
yes.
like weighing in on like, should I write this for the like this fantasy, high fantasy of like a nun slaying dragons for no reason. Honestly, no reason to slay a dragon. But yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, here's the thing. You said nuns and you said dragons and now I'm wondering if there's going to be like a sequel series to Blaze Wrath that
No.
is nuns.
I mean,
Um
I love Grave Mercy, the Grave Mercy books. They have like an official name. The series has an official name, but it's Grave Mercy is the first book, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they are like 18th century or 17th. Am I mixing up the centuries? I probably am, but they're like killer nuns. There's a young adult
oh,
fantasy,
okay.
and they're like, I say
Uh-huh.
killer nuns, and it sounds like a horror movie, like a B movie, but it's like a
Uh-huh.
convent, and they are trained in different
Mhm.
homicidal arts, and so some of them are spies, but
Okay.
they master how to murder someone with poison, for example, or others are like they wield daggers and
Okay.
such. They're so great. Like they're great books, and it doesn't feel comical at all, or like, oh, it's just like, but it's just, I love those books. So yeah.
I just wrote that down to
No
read
dragons,
it because
no dragons, but
that sounds well, that kind of thing sounds exactly up my alley because as much of like a religion and theology nerd as I am, I also love that like this type of stuff that seems on the surface like it could be sacrilegious.
right,
I'm
it
not,
is,
I'm
yeah.
not like I'm not afraid of it. I actually took a really great course in college about iconography, and it was
Oh,
like the history of Christian iconography, and
that's always been something really interesting for me as well, because I
yeah.
listened to heavy metal growing up, and
Mm-hmm.
I have always been very curious about, people who are against using iconography in
Mm-hmm.
ways that feel like it is sacrilegious, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically when it is used as a tool for rebellion in
Mm-hmm.
these aesthetically focused or driven
Mm-hmm.
vehicles. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because I've always wondered, like, this is clearly not what the Bible was intended to do, or the cross, or
Right.
whatever other
Right.
instrument, right? So I feel like it's
Mhm.
interesting to have those conversations. It's like, how far is too
Mhm.
far for you specifically,
Mhm.
and how far is too far for you? And because you have a lot of metal fans or metal listeners, casual metal
Right.
listeners who are very religious.
Right.
And it's just like there's
Mhm.
even Christian metal or like Christian rock.
Yes.
So it's
Absolutely. Yeah.
interesting to see how everything gets reinterpreted, everything gets reclaimed
Mhm.
somehow. And
Mhm.
it's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject to me.
Yeah, yeah, iconography is it really is truly very rich and interesting, and I think that the reaction to anything that looks like it's sacrilegious or mocking Christ or God or or any other figure within Christianity, because this issue is different for other faiths, and I just want to I don't want to make it seem like I'm speaking for all faiths, but within Christianity, I actually think that by not being afraid or not recoiling against imagery that seems sacrilegious, we can actually find and experience more profound theological truths and realities.
Yeah,
For example,
I actually agree. Yeah.
there, yeah, there was some fan art that I found many years ago of Adventure Time, but
Oh,
it was
wow.
but it was so these pieces of fan art, they're really cool because one of them is the painting, the creation of Adam, except it's in the place of Adam it's Lemongrab, and in the place of God it's Princess Bubblegum, and then all
Oh,
the like they recreated the actual painting
right.
but made it all Adventure Time characters, and so
Okay.
which which is so there's the surface level of it, which is like this is hilarious,
Yeah.
and it's making a parody, but at the same time in the show Princess Bubblegum literally created Lemongrab, and he does have this crisis of like, why did you make me? I am suffering. And so
it's funny, actually.
it is, but also at the same time, it's very profound, and it highlights the way that humanity relates to, you know, in Christianity, we're like, God created us, and yet there's so much suffering that we deal with. There's so much, there's so much brokenness that we have within us. And so I wrote like an entire essay about this.
That's
and
amazing.
What was the artist of this fan art piece like trying to be this theologically deep about it? I don't know.
Right.
But the point is that this type of fan art, it can seem like it's making a mockery of things. And I can imagine a more conservative, traditional Christian viewer of the art piece having that reaction and recoiling it and just like, you know, shoving it aside.
Yeah, being very critical of it.
Instantly after seeing it. And as opposed to sitting with it, sitting with seeing that image for a few minutes and then having a greater understanding. Granted, I do think that like I'm not like a horror movie person at all. And so it's just not my thing. And things that like look gross or scary, like I don't like feeling scared. And so just for me, like I'm not gonna always engage in that stuff. But yeah, there absolutely is like this subset of metal fandom where there are a lot of Christians in it. A lot of, and I think, gosh, I would have to ask one of my friends from college. I went to a Christian college, and I know a lot of very interesting people from that. One of my friends she's very, very interesting, but also she's like a really like hardcore metal fan among lots of other types of music. And she told me once about this one metal band, and I'm forgetting their name, but they started off as like this, like truly, like they were literally actually Satanists.
Okay.
And then they were pulling all this stuff from like Catholic liturgy and like twisting it around or whatever. But then the lead singer actually like converted and became a Christian. Like he did like a 180. And I guess it might have been through like engaging in these texts that he was using to create his art that he then had this like, you know, transformation spiritually. It just, I don't know the name of the band. Probably somebody out there does, like knows exactly what I'm talking about, but it's just really, really interesting. And there definitely is like this reaction within a more like traditional Christianity of like, oh, metal music especially is so bad and so you know. But then, you know, you have bands like Showbread, which they're not metal, they're like post-hardcore, but they're, if you like screaming, if you like guys that are screaming and but it's just there is, for every like way that Christianity has been strict and has tried to impose these limits on art and artistic expression, there's always like a subculture even within Christianity that's like, no, we're going to engage with this. Right. We're going to totally just make this our thing now. And you can always find those subsets.
And I feel like also in terms of what you were talking about, the whole belief or stereotype that metal bands are the ones who use this specific imagery just for shock value. Sometimes, you know, you do have conversations, or something will spark a conversation, I should say. And what we're trying to find here is the purpose. Like, what is the purpose of what you're doing? Because if it's just for shock value, it really adds nothing to the conversation. But for example, I have a friend, one of my closest friends is very, very Catholic. And her favorite group is in K-pop, the K-pop world. But one of her favorite group, actually, her loves, had a comeback or had a video where they used iconography, religious, specifically Catholic iconography, and she was, or iconography associated with the Catholic Church, and she was just very upset, and she didn't want to support that specific album or that video. And she was just like, do I do this? Do I support them? What are they trying to tell me with this? And I felt like that was an important conversation to have with her, because I personally didn't feel like it added much to any conversation, like what they were trying to do. They were basically just using it to convey a specific message within their albums, their discography, but it wasn't necessarily a critique of anything religious in general or Catholic specifically. And I feel like it was mainly to highlight something that they were already building throughout their career. And she felt really uncomfortable with that. So it was interesting to have that conversation with her, because I was like, in my head, I'm like looking at the video and I'm just like, this is such a great video. But then I'm like talking to her, and as someone who is very deeply associated with this specific belief system, she was very taken aback. And I was like, oh, yeah, that did happen in the video, you know? I didn't really think twice about it, but that's just the differences that we can have with the media that we consume, or the critiques that we have of the media that we consume. Those need to be opened up for discussion. Because if we're always just, and the artists themselves, whether it's through music or any other form of art, if you're doing something just to do it and see how people react to it, you're really not doing much. But if you really do want to portray a specific or convey a specific message, whether it's of acceptance, rebellion, guilt, whatever it is that you're trying to do, oppression, freedom, whatever it is that you're trying to do it with purpose, because otherwise, and as writers, we can also learn that as people, do everything with intent. And even I know accidents happen, and sometimes things go down ways that we didn't intend them to go down. But at the end of the day, you need to be at peace with yourself enough to know that you did what you wanted to do in that specific moment in life, in time. So yeah, those are just things that I've noticed throughout the years. I'm like, the media that I consume has always had something to say about something. And mostly it's just romantic love, let's be honest, or like relationships in general. But I learned so much from my students specifically, and from my friends. They consume media that I never even heard of. So it's interesting for me to be like, oh, I'm still growing as a person. I'm still learning a lot. It never stops. And whoever thinks that they're done with learning, or that they don't need to know more about something that they know so much about, is incorrect. So
yeah, as Socrates said,
oh my gosh, we're getting philosophical
I know.
here. I only know that I know nothing. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Well, for real though, when I studied philosophy, and I studied Socrates, and read that, encountered that for the first time, like that really actually did stick with me as just a vibe and an attitude. And I think it's completely valid, and it's something that, we seem to have lost a little bit in our terminally online culture, in terms of, they're not being grace to grow. And it's, of course, you're probably thinking of the same essay that I'm thinking of, and I'll go ahead and set the context. There was a really in-depth essay that was published a week or so ago. By this point, by the point of this recording, by the time this comes out, it'll be even longer. But it's about the title is something like did Twitter break YA? Yeah, and it's specifically talking about or contextualized in the young adult book publishing Twitter space, but also gets into other social media spaces, and it raises these bigger ideas of how we interact online, and this moral purity that we expect of authors and other creators, to the point where there's no room for people to actually grow and learn, and to the point where people feel like they can't engage or interact or be within the community. And again, it's so interesting to me, like seeing this moral purity, because it's a secular moral purity.
Right.
And I'm coming from a context of being very familiar with a traditional evangelical Christian type of moral purity and purity culture. And it's just wild to me that seeing the same energy in this this secular progressive mindset, because that's where it's coming from. And I'm like, I've like talked to my friends about it. I'm like, this feels it feels so weird, because I could not imagine when I was a teenager there being any sort of crossover between the purity culture that I like yeeted myself into
Right.
in there, and then what's happening here in terms of like this expectation of knowing all of the right pronouns and identities for every single possibility, and knowing the right, never saying anything, wrong or problematic. Like I can understand that coming from a conservative religious context, but seeing it in a space that is theoretically supposed to be more more open and kind of a reaction or a rebellion against that type of culture, it's just it's very wild
It
to me.
is. And
And
it's
it's
never
hard
ending.
to
Like it feeds
it really
feeds
is.
itself, or it feeds into itself. It starts, it continues, it starts all over again, and then it continues in a different direction. And you're like, I understand that a lot of things deserve to be called out, and people need to be accountable for what they do. But sometimes these moral high grounds are just tactics and tools to harass others. And it can be for something as simple as saying, I use bookmarks while I read. I don't like turn the corner, like the edge of the page. It's like that creates a debate, and people just go into Twitter, or they go into their accounts, and they see they have so many notifications of people bashing them as a person because they don't use bookmarks. That type of stuff is very, very problematic. But when it comes to actually calling out people who have been toxic and poisonous, truly, or dangerous, then yes, absolutely. But we're not really using Twitter for some of the things that should be used for. We're using it to feel like we are constantly one-upping others, and we are the truth. We are the authority. I feel like I'm in a Tom Cruise sci-fi movie. I am the authority. So sorry, I don't know why I mentioned Tom Cruise.
Well, yeah, and it's so hard to parse that out, because especially when it comes to like authors and creatives making public mistakes. And look, some people's public mistakes are worse than other people's
for sure. And they're easier to blow up into an actual thing.
Right. But it's so hard, I think, for the internet as a whole to look at somebody who makes a mistake and ascertain if they are really changing or doing anything different from that, number one. And number two, giving that same person the space to like do that growth and change. Now, I know most of the things that tend to blow up on publishing Twitter also unfortunately tend to be things where it's like a chronic cycle of behavior, where there's a lot of instances of kind of the same thing over and over again for a lot of years. And that does sort of create this expectation that then anybody else who ever makes a mistake or says the wrong thing is exactly like these chronic perpetual people who don't actually like care about what it is that they're doing.
Right.
And then, applying the same communication method to that chronic, over and over again person to somebody who didn't say something clearly in their tweet or put something in their book with not enough context according to the screenshot that was posted by
Right.
whoever is calling it out.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and there's no, and now all of my church people listening to this are probably maybe feeling very, very lost. So I will bring this,
Yeah.
bring this comparison to something that y'all might understand. And that's this. This is kind of the equivalent of, you're having your consistory or church council meeting and the entire 3-hour session is taken over by 2 or 3 people arguing very, very intensely about which hymnals to be putting in the pews or what time to start the service. If you do, because some churches will do like summer hours and they might do like a seasonal shift. Or like think for my church people, my UCC people, think of like the really trivial matters that can just dig so deeply into your local congregations
Right.
and cause these very like dramatic divisions. That's what a lot of this this culture online can sometimes be like. And in those, and I bring that up because I want to get into this concept of grace, and how we should have more of it in these, in these progressive spaces that we're in. I mean, yes, a lot of us are adopting and very like into progressive values because maybe we did come from a very strict, more conservative and unaccepting type of background where you might be in a context where people aren't respecting pronouns and they're not, they're not respecting these things that, are really about basic human decency. But then, and so then, there is this level of like, a lot of people have been hurt. And so when they see like anything that is similar to that, because maybe they haven't done enough of their own healing work, like in themselves, then it's really, really hard to have grace and to extend grace. This is kind of going back to how this is like a secular progressive phenomenon, and not that like secular folks don't understand the concept of grace, but like me coming from a religious context and talking about grace and forgiveness and these things that, are more prevalent, I guess, or they're really, really prevalent values in religious contexts. And I'm like, maybe our secular progressivism just needs a dose of some of these general like religious concepts and understandings around what it means to have grace and humility and forgiveness, because forgiveness is really widely misunderstood even within Christianity, because people tend to think that like forgiveness is about like pretending that something never happened or like fully getting over something that happened. But it's more nuanced than that. And it's more about like moving on but not forgetting that something happened. But a lot of people might tend to think of forgiveness as like, it's okay that you like, somebody's like, I'm sorry I did XYZ, and then person B is like, it's okay, I forgive you. Well, maybe it's not okay. Maybe it's not okay, but I forgive you.
Yeah.
And
it's a personal choice. It's like, if you don't want to forgive someone, then you shouldn't. But at the same time, if you're not forgiving them because you intend on being petty, like it's just that is also a problem.
Yeah, it's just, the pettiness that can happen in online spaces too, where, people can dig up things that you wrote 10 years ago when you were a different person and say like, oh, explain this. And it's like, well, okay, the explanation is that I was I was a different person in a different place in my life. And, you know, is there space for that in this online purity culture that we're seeing more and more of? Sometimes I don't, but also I don't know. I don't know if that's always present. So
Yeah, for me, it's
ugh.
mostly just I would take it case by case. Like I take
Mm-hmm.
everything case by case. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
do my regular blanket statements like I will never write sci-fi because I'm not good enough to write sci-fi. Not because I don't read sci-fi
Right.
or I don't enjoy it, but I just don't think I could
Right.
ever successfully master that specific genre.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's one example of a blanket statement I make. But other than that, I
Mm-hmm.
take everything case by case. If the person that I am interacting with right now, in terms of like a Twitter call out, is someone
Mm-hmm.
that I genuinely feel is someone that deserves to be listened to and like given
Mm-hmm.
that space to grow and
Mm-hmm.
genuinely wants to grow and wants to be a better
Mm-hmm.
person, then sure. But I,
Right.
even if I accept it, I have to understand
Mm-hmm.
that not everyone, specifically the people that that person harmed, it's not
Right.
my place to be like, hey, on behalf of them, I'm
Right.
gonna
Right.
forgive you. You
Exactly.
know, I choose to
Yeah.
forgive you, and that's it. Because actually, that's
Right.
something that's come up a lot this past week
Mm-hmm.
for me in my personal life, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily trust a lot of people. I like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, but I don't necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
You're not my friends, you know.
Sure. Sure.
But I feel like at the same time, I just want what's best from people, and or,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, for people. So I
Right.
tend to
Right.
think the best about them and until I don't. But it doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
that I trust them with my life or
Mm-hmm.
my choices or anything and or my
Right.
time. But I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
I really want you to be a good person. Prove me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's my attitude
Mm-hmm.
to meeting people.
Right.
But in
Right.
terms of like some people that I've never even met and I kind of know from others' experiences that they have
Mm-hmm.
been very hurtful, yet
Mm-hmm.
they still have the support of a lot of other people. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what anyone else tells me. Like, I saw this specific instance. It was an isolated
Mm-hmm.
case, but it was
Mm-hmm.
so damaging that I feel like it could cause some serious hurt to other
Mm-hmm.
people down the line if
Mm-hmm.
this happens to them. And no one is checking you, no one is like telling you that this is wrong. I'm
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable with that. So, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, I completely agree with you. Forgiveness is about understanding what happened and knowing that moving
Mm-hmm.
forward with maybe another chance for this person is
Mm-hmm.
okay. Because there's also the forgiveness that's my personal forgiveness. It's like, I know what
Mm-hmm.
you did, I accept what you
Right.
did. We both learned
Right.
and grew. I
Mm-hmm.
forgive you, but I'd never want to interact
Mm-hmm.
with you again. And I have no
Mm-hmm.
ill will toward you. I don't want you to do
Mm-hmm.
bad things with your life. I don't want bad things
Mm-hmm.
to happen to you. But I just don't want to
Right.
be in your life. So I feel
Right.
like that's more my jam. But a
Right.
lot of people are like, this person is terrible. They must be stopped at all costs for saying that, they use bookmarks or they don't use bookmarks. Sorry,
Right.
they like flip the
Right.
edge of the page and that's it. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Or like fold the cover like on a
Oh, right, right,
paperback or
right,
break
right,
break the
right. Yeah,
spines.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of discourse
Yeah.
on how to treat a book, right? And that's fine. I understand that. But people are,
Mm-hmm.
and of course we have to look at privilege. Privilege is a huge
Mm-hmm.
part of Twitter discourse and
Yeah.
publishing Twitter
Yeah.
discourse. It's how do we
Mm-hmm.
use privilege to our advantage versus how
Mm-hmm.
we have to fight for things that feel like they're favors, but for other people, they're everyday.
Mm-hmm.
So those are, and it's wonderful that you mentioned like the moral purity aspect of it because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of people coming in trying to reclaim spaces that don't belong to them by saying, I belong here. And it's all
Mm-hmm.
because everything has been handed to them. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's interesting because you see that in a lot of other spaces. It's not the only
Mm-hmm.
industry where this
Mm-hmm.
happens, but it's the loudest.
Right.
I would say in my personal life, it's the loudest because I
Mm-hmm.
only teach as another job, like
Mm-hmm.
another industry that I belong to is education.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know if I should call
Mm-hmm.
it an industry, it's just a field.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting how something can be blown up, blown out of proportion
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, but
Mm-hmm.
just used as like to punish others,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. So sad.
Yeah, it's a really it's a really tricky space to enter into
Yes.
because like and I guess too, like with your approach to it, like what you are doing basically is you're having as much context
Oh,
as you
yeah,
can,
I love
like
to know
before,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, like before, yeah, all the cheese
I'm
in
like,
here.
yeah, I'm like, wait, what happened? Okay, let me just,
Right,
and I just, that was
right,
the
right,
sound, my sound
um,
effect for like using my phone.
right, right. But I think that is, an important guiding principle to try to have in our online spaces when something happens, when a conversation blows up because some author did a problematic thing, or for my church people, some pastor somewhere did a problematic
Yeah.
thing. Although church Twitter is like different from YA Twitter. Like
Oh,
UCC people, um, well, UCC people specifically are only on Twitter during General Synod, and we have fun
oh,
in our own little ways there. But I'm generalizing, but there just aren't like Christian Twitter is a thing. It's but UCC specifically, like there doesn't seem to be like a huge like Twitter culture like constantly around that. But these are conversations that we do have in the UCC, especially at the national level. We have workshops a dozen in General Synod, which is like our every 2 years the whole denomination gathers and votes on different resolutions that could be about various social justice issues or like matters about how the church like is structured or operates internally. And but there are always workshops that are like talking about decolonization of faith and doing anti-racist work and like what does it look like and I'm just rattling off workshops that are happening that happened in this year's General Synod, talking about like church so white,
yeah,
like the whiteness of the church. Just like in the UCC, these conversations are happening and the work is happening. It's just not on Twitter. But it's equally tricky to step into because it's just super, it can be super loaded and it can be super uncomfortable. And one thing that we always talk about in the UCC when we're doing like racial justice work is um, like having the grace and humility to sort of be comfortable with the discomfort.
yeah,
And I think that I think that the church offers the church that has these types of conversations. There's a certain structure that you can have around it, and certain values and approaches to entering into conversations, whether it's on Twitter or anywhere else,
yeah,
that can just kind of ground you in terms of like, okay, you know, can we think the best of the person saying XYZ. Maybe we can a lot more times than we give grace for on Twitter.
right.
But then there are also, of course, times when we can't because there are like bad faith actors.
Yeah,
But I think too, like the constant like defensiveness and anger and quick to retweet and quote tweet with maybe without reading fully or whatever. Um, it encourages us to stay in this place of rage um and and anger, and that's not sustainable.
yeah,
That's not sustainable for anybody's mental health. And so you don't have to feel like you're fighting all the time on social media or on Twitter. It doesn't have to be that type of space. It
yeah,
shouldn't have to be that type of space. It should be, we should be able to sort of like move back a little bit and maybe think about what it is that we want to say if we want to engage with whatever the conversation is, number one, and number two, if we have anything helpful to add to it at all, or if our involvement in the conversation is just going to perpetuate the rage machine.
Yeah. And it often does.
So
often it's just like an ellipsis or like the three dots after the end of the sentence. Everything continues. It can be recycled. It can be transformed to something else. But for the most part, you do encounter these specific topics that will always come back. And these specific unethical behaviors within publishing, specifically from literary agents or maybe even people within editorial houses who will engage in unethical behavior and practices, harming their clients, harming potential clients. And that's when it just blows up again, I guess. So it's always going to be a thing because people are always going to make it a thing. And it's sad, but at the same time, it's, I don't know, it helps me ground myself. It makes me even more grateful to know that outside of, if I close the app, I have a life, I have things to do, I have people to share my life with and love and just be kind to them and accept their kindness as well. So I feel like Twitter isn't everything, social media isn't everything. The vacuum is simply that, a vacuum.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember a lot about what grounds you, who you are, what makes you joyful. And in the specific case, like what is something that you want to create for yourself that others can also enjoy. In the specific case of writers, right? It's like, or artists in general. Like, what is it that you are trying to do because it makes you happy, but also you feel like others will get a fulfillment from it as well. So it's hard to do, but we can do it. We can persevere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I kind of wish there was more like digital etiquette class.
Sure.
Like if there could be like a class that you take in school, right? Like you take social studies, you take
history,
math,
you
take, the nuns are teaching you,
religion.
X, Y,
there's like a whole religion class.
Right. But then if there could be more, like, you in your K-12 school, you have a class that you take that is about sort of engaging in online discourse in a healthy and productive way. Because I think, a lot of these social media technologies, they're so new, and the younger and younger generations compared to my generation, like it's already here. They don't have a childhood without these very public ways of expressing themselves. And so all of their teenagerness is there for a much more public audience. And so I think that is also part of where this moral purity culture comes from, is because you have a lot of young people who are they're very well-meaning, and they are very caring individuals, and they want everybody to be loved and respected and valued, and they want to be loved and respected and valued themselves.
That's so great.
But also, there is such concern about saying the wrong thing and believing the wrong thing because everything is so public.
Yeah.
That it's almost like I wonder if some of our young people really have this intense fear of making any mistake at all because their whole lives are so public on the internet, and there's no space even for them to like be teenagers and make mistakes.
I agree. I think that we are going to be seeing, when we're a little bit older, like the adults that are coming in and they're going to be our ages, they're going to have very different experiences with social media. There might be even platforms that we have never heard of because they're going to make them. So I feel like it's going to evolve in ways that will catch us off guard and will challenge us. But at the same time, we'll feel familiar because these types of situations will always arise out of the spaces that are created essentially to engage with other people, to interact with other people. But no one ever says, oh, if you're, well, I mean, there are, Twitter, for example, has really bad ways of keeping harassment out of the equation, but because I feel like they fail at it mostly. So like if you report a specific tweet or a person, sometimes they'll be like, this isn't harmful, what are you talking about? I'm like, excuse me. So that's not gonna change, I don't think. Hopefully it gets better. Hopefully there is more safety involved and more fun involved for everyone, but at the same time, I'm not hopeful. I'm not keeping myself that optimistic.
Well, you know, we can be optimistic about the art and the work that you are creating. And so I want to get into sort of like yourself as a writer. It sounds like you were always writing as a young person.
I was not.
You were not?
I wrote one.
You just your non-fan fiction? Was that it?
Well, actually I did write, but it was poetry and terrible songs. Like as a middle schooler and high schooler, that was it for me.
Okay.
When I was like in the second, third grade, I wrote my first short story, and then I wrote like a couple of more short stories as a child, but then I stopped writing altogether. And when I hit ninth grade, I started reading. Like that was when I read books for fun for the first time, when I was in ninth grade. And then I wrote lyrics and poems because, oh my God, boys. And then in my senior year of high school, when I was 17 years old, I started writing what would eventually be my first novel. So I started when I was 17, stopped like a month later, didn't finish it until when I was 19 years old, already in college. I caught the bug again. And I was like, I want to finish this novel that I never finished. Finished it. It was horrible. Still querying it. And of course, did not get any representation from any agent because they were like, well, this is horrible. And I'm like, oh no, I'm horrible. And then I wrote another book and another book and another book. The third book I queried was the fifth book I finished or completed. That was the book that got me my agent. And then that was in 2015, December 2nd, 2015. I remember because it was Britney Spears' birthday. And and then
hashtag free Britney.
Free Britney, yes. And then I had my first publishing credit in 2018 with my short story comic in the Puerto Rico Strong anthology, which is benefiting the country after Hurricane Maria. And all the funds go to supporting and financing the island for materials they sorely need still to this day in 2021. And then that was 2018, 2019. It won the Eisner Award for Best Anthology. And yes, in 2018, later on that year, I got my very first book deal, but that has not actually been announced yet. So I can't actually say what it's about or anything. But just to give you an idea of how publishing works, it's very slow. So I got my first ever book deal in 2018. Cut to 2019, and I got my book deal for Blaze Wrath Games, which is a young adult contemporary fantasy about a Puerto Rican girl who wants to compete in the World Cup, but it has dragons. And there is a dragon supremacist who wants to cancel the cup. And if his terms aren't met, then he is going to wreak havoc around the world. And so that sold in a duology or 2-book deal. I also sold a middle grade graphic novel earlier that year. That's coming out next summer. It's called Saving Chupi, and that is going to be my first book set entirely in Puerto Rico. And it's about a 12-year-old girl named Violeta whose parents are Puerto Rican, or whose mother is Puerto Rican. And they come to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria to help her grandmother resettle here and like reopen her restaurant. But she discovers that a chupacabra, a young baby chupacabra, is, I don't want to say wreaking havoc again, but wreaking havoc around the town. And so she has to stop this chupacabra, but at the same time, she discovers that it's not as menacing as she was led to believe. So that's a really cute supernatural middle grade that's coming out next year. And the rest is history. I have a horror anthology that's also coming out next year. and that's all Latina authors. We're very excited to share the full official lineup soon, hopefully with the cover attached to it, so that everyone can see the names in all one place. And that's moving along swimmingly. I mean, I revised my short story for that because I have a contribution in it, and it's a short story that is set entirely in Puerto Rico as well, and it features one of our many myths, which is El Vampiro de Moca, which is during the 70s. It was believed that a vampire was eating or destroying cattle and also attacking some of very few humans that swore that they saw a bat flying at them in the nighttime. So, and that they were attacked by said bat. So I was like, oh, interesting, vampires in Puerto Rico? I'm in. So yeah, I have a couple of things that I'm working on as well, but they are either unsold or unannounced. So gotta wait. But I'm excited because I feel like I'm at my busiest. But I don't feel that busy because everything is like, you have this set of months to work on X, Y, Z, and then this other set of months to do that. Right now I'm doing a first draft or writing a first draft of a book. That's going to be announced soon. And then I'm launching the sequel and final book in the Blaze Wrath Games duology this October, which is the book that Taylor mentioned. And it's going to be exciting to wrap up the story, but at the same time, I'm curious to see if I did the story justice and the characters justice. So I feel like it is a better book than Blaze Wrath Games, but at the same time, it is so different because Blaze Wrath Games to me is more fun. It has more lightheartedness in it. But the Dragon Blood Ring is less so because it's an exploration of trauma and baggage that has been carried for years for one of my narrators. And I don't know, it's about stopping a death match. Dragons trying to like survive because a witch is pitting them against each other to see which dragon is superior. And it's like, well, why did I write this book? Again, tell me again why I wrote this book. But that's essentially my journey. I've been writing on and off. But then once I turned 17, I took it a little bit more seriously, and the rest is history.
Fantastic. And I have to say that I've mentioned Puerto Rico Strong on this podcast before because I have it and I've read it. And it's a very, very good anthology. And I've also mentioned Blaze Wrath Games on this podcast before because here's one of the things that I love about this book and why I will again say to all of my listeners, all like 20 or 30 of you, to read this book is because, I mean, especially if you have like a diaspora ni de aquí ni de allá kind of experience, like Lana is your girl. Like she like
that's so sweet.
We protect that child. But no, because when I read it, I mean, not to be like all cat person on you, but like when Cat Person is the name of that story that we were talking about before, where it was like too much based on the real person. I don't know if I mentioned the name before or not. So
yes, you did. Yeah.
But no, like because the first like chapter or so, Lana talks about like, oh yeah, well my mom is American and my dad's Puerto Rican, and I'm like, excuse me. Except for me, it's opposite. Like it's switched. You did not cat person me. It's my mom who's Puerto Rican, my dad who is not. And so like I definitely like that was like an instant connection. I was like, oh my gosh, because I still go into like reading things about Puerto Rico where I'm like, I'm not going to relate to this at all because I like, it's still just this internalized thing that I deal with. And then I read the thing and I'm like, I relate to this and this and this and this and this. And oh my gosh, this is so, but yeah, like it's not necessarily Lana does deal with like kind of cultural anxiety in terms of like not feeling Puerto Rican enough. And I think I'm glad that that's in there because I think that's the first time that I've read a book with that specific like of an experience of mine reflected in there. Yeah, and not to be like I read a lot on the one hand, but also there's a lot that I haven't read. And so, I don't want to make it seem like, this has never, ever happened before in literature ever. But I think it just does go to show like the importance of representation. And I'm also somebody who I feel like in a lot of fictional scenarios, I can usually find some level of representation in terms of, well, this character looks like me, or this
Right.
character, you know, has my same like orientation or whatever. Like, but it's the Latina like experiences, the specific ones that I have, that like I've only seen in Elena Alvarez from
Oh,
One Day at a Time.
right.
Like, oh my gosh, she is literally me in an alternate universe. Like, you want to talk about like cat personing? I'm
Oh,
like,
someone cat personed me.
oh my gosh, what if cat person becomes like
A
a
thing, a
verb?
thing. You know what?
Like,
I'm making it one. It's over for me. It's like I'm cat personing. I would never cat person anyone. But I mean, no, I don't have any intentions of doing that.
oh my gosh.
But that's so sweet of you
But
to say, because I don't relate to her in the sense that I'm not diaspora, but at the same time, I feel like
mhm,
a lot of her concerns are things that people here in Puerto Rico also have concerns with. It's
mhm,
like,
mhm,
um, I don't necessarily jive with this particular experience.
mhm,
And that's why someone like Victoria, her character for me was so important, because she is that pushback, she is that resistance.
mhm,
And you don't necessarily see that wildly accurately portrayed in real life, because
mhm,
people will be more of an internal judgment kind of thing.
mhm.
But or maybe if we're talking about Twitter, that's not internal at all. But I feel like Victoria lives on social media like that, exactly like that. But it's
Mm,
important for me to have her look up at Lana and say, "What are you doing here? How do you belong? Like, prove yourself to me." And all
mm,
under the guise of saying, "Oh, I'm just testing you as an athlete. I'm just trying to see if you're good enough to help
right,
our team win in this cup."
right.
So yeah.
Yeah, that is such a interesting dynamic, and I'm looking forward to seeing like fully how that plays out
Oh
in Dragon Blood Ring, because you do have Lana and
yes,
Victoria as a
they're
perspective.
both
And
narrators this time around.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Which was my
and of
editor's,
course,
my former editor's suggestion. They were like,
okay.
I want Victoria to have like her own story. And I'm like, well, can we
Mhm.
make it like both Lana and
Mhm.
Victoria? Because it was supposed to be like the way my editor pitched it was like, or they didn't pitch it, but they were like,
Mhm.
can it be just a Victoria book? And I'm like, oh, but I feel like
Mm.
Lana's story isn't over yet. So
Mhm.
we combine them, and I feel like it works. But I mean, I've had people read it and say, wow, they're very different because, Victoria is all raw emotion, but like in a
Mhm.
cerebral way at the same time. And Lana is
Mhm.
emotion, but in like an angsty, this is
Mhm.
overwhelming for me kind of way. Whereas Victoria is
Mhm.
like, I am not overwhelmed. I am not consumed by my emotions. I am the master. I'm just angry about having emotions.
I love that, and also hashtag Lanatoria rights.
Yes.
No, when it comes first of all, I'm just being completely silly with the shipping. I'll be happy
Oh
with
no, it's fine.
however you
I
like tell
love
the
it though.
story. Yeah. Yeah, no, but just like just to like, I don't want people to actually like say that you're queer baiting anything at all.
Oh, right, right,
If
right.
you're if
Yeah.
like by me like using
That
online
hashtag, yeah.
fandom like
Yes.
hashtag Lanatoria rights, and then because people throw around the term queer baiting now in contexts that don't apply. But no, I do think that, at least because I've only read the first book, obviously, it's they do have such like a like opposite energy,
They
but
do.
then like the ways that they come together, though, like it's just it'll be very interesting to sort of see. Like I think that's a really good um sort of narrative choice to have them both, because I think that creates a lot of tension. If it's not tension between the two of them, then tension in general. So I think that'll be really, really super
Correct.
interesting to see. And whoever Lana ends up with, it could be nobody, it could be somebody. Like I'll be happy, because I tend to be like, most of the time, like, oh cool, like the author, the creator, the showrunners, this is the story that they wanted to tell. and this is how things played out. And like I'm a writer, like I get it, like characters do things and have have their own relationships, and really, like, I mean, fandom can be fandom, but at the end of the day, like, we should still, I'm a little bit old school in that way, of a product of my generation, that we should still respect, like,
for sure.
what the creator, like, puts forward in terms of how they're dealing with any shipping or not, like, in their books. And shipping, for my confused church people that don't know internet language, shipping means that you have like two characters and you want them to be in a romantic relationship with each other. So like ship, the end of relationship, and it's just taken to be its own term. And it's there's such beautiful fan art of many ships.
Yes.
And,
we stand them all. We love them all.
we stand.
Yes.
And we stand Victoria. She sounds like I love me like a good queen bitch character. And like
she would love to be called that. She would love to be known as that. Yes.
See, we love that.
Yes.
And I also love that you tweeted the other day that currently the book Bloodbath.
Oh, that was the original title, yeah.
Or sorry, Dragon Blood.
Yeah.
See, okay. Anyway, the book that you have that's coming out that I know the title of but can't say right now it has a banner on Amazon, and it's number 1 in
the geography.
Is it still?
I checked this morning; it was still there. I'm like, what is it doing there? It's like number 1 in geography and Caribbean fiction, I believe it is.
It's like what the category name is just it's funny weird, to me how the category is worded, because it's like it's youth and young adult Caribbean geography,
and it's not
fiction.
Even like a geography textbook or anything like that. It's not even set in the Caribbean entirely, and it's just like, you know what, I'll take it, I don't care. It's a number 1. I take my number 1 seriously.
Yeah, well, that just means that, we just need to be ready for where this story is going.
Yes, because
that's why it's in the geography section. Because we have to.
It is that book, because in Blaze Wrath Games we're in Florida. We start off in Naples, Florida, and then we go to Dubai, and then we have a little bit of a detour somewhere else. And we're also in the United States. So in this case, in the United States, we go back to the United States, but in this case. We are spanning a little bit more. Yeah, the globe it's expanding. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm so excited. Wow.
Yeah. And also, I love how in the sport of Blaze Wrath, the United States just simply doesn't have a team.
Right, because they don't have a dragon, And my logic for that is mainly if the United States were to have dragons, they would be from the Native American communities. And I feel because the dragons are very much about originating communities, or not originating. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but the first indigenous people on that are in that specific territory. So it would not make sense for a wyvern or like any other European dragon to be part of the United States. It's like, no, it would definitely be one of the tribe's dragons. So I definitely feel like I have no business writing about that. And I would love to I'm not the editorial house, but I would love to be like, hey, I would love to like one day do like an anthology of different dragons that aren't in this world, or maybe they are, but I don't talk about them much or at all. So it's like bringing different authors from different countries or different cultures and writing their own dragons. And it's like, but all set within a World Cup. And I feel like that's why there's no, like, it doesn't have a team. So it's like, whatever.
Right. Well, that's really cool. Like a really cool idea. It's something that I've thought about too, like how I would like to treat some of my own work is like, there's aspects of worlds that I create that, maybe I personally shouldn't be writing, but to like do an expanded universe type of thing.
Right.
I think, that sounds cool if that anthology were to end up happening. And I think that is just a great way to sort of like carry the spirit of what a lot of fandom is about, because a lot of fandom and like creation within fandom is a more like collaborative experience.
Yeah.
And then to carry that over into publishing, now that it's like less of a taboo to be like, hey, I'm an author and I used to write fanfic. Like,
right.
even just a few,
Correct.
like 10 years ago, like you couldn't ever admit that.
Yeah, it was very taboo. But Tracy Dion, for example, one of my favorite people and authors, she is very open about writing fan fiction, and she has studied fan fiction as a scholar. So it's just like, why are we so embarrassed about, like, not embarrassed because we are embarrassed ourselves, but because shame is added or put onto this specific enjoyment or this specific form of entertainment? Because that's what fan fiction is. It's derived from other forms of entertainment. It can be other books, TV shows, songs, like even real people, like, but not cat person, not like that.
Yeah, the real person fix.
The real person fix is a little bit gray area-ish for me.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's interesting. But I'm excited to like finally share this book, because I just feel like it's a stronger work than Blaze Wrath Games, and I also just want to know what the people that have supported Blaze Wrath Games since before it even came out, and are excited to read Dragon Blood Ring. I feel like I owe this book to them, because I wrote this book in 2020. Like, it was really hard to write this book. I was burned out, but not from work, just like emotionally stunted. And so finishing this book, getting it out on shelves, it's just going to be so rewarding. And I feel like knowing that people wanted to read it helped me get through the worst part of having to work during a pandemic. So.
Well, that is a wonderful segue into an invitation. Every time I have a writer on here, I love to give them space to read any work that they want or that they have. So I would love for you to introduce what you're going to read to us. And wonderful. Okay, so this is book 1, Blaze Wrath Games, that you'll be reading from. And so for our audience members who haven't, we've already been talking about the book a little bit, but just tell us a little bit about, maybe set the context for the excerpt that you'll be reading from.
So I'm going to be reading from the first chapter, the first 5 pages, and this is where our main character, Lana, is trying to get to her audition, or to her tryout for the Blaze Wrath World Cup, because Team Puerto Rico is missing one player, and she wants to be this player. But her mother hates dragons with a passion, so she has to sneak around and essentially do all sorts of things to keep her secret from her mom. She knows her father would appreciate it because they both love the same sport. She grew up learning about dragons and the World Cup because of her dad. So she feels disconnected from her mother, not just because her mother is a white American woman, but also because she just doesn't get her passion for dragons and for Blaze Wrath in general. Or specifically, I should say. Dragons in general, Blaze Wrath specifically. So the thing about these chapters, and this is a trend that continues in Dragon Blood Ring, is that they have epigraphs or like quotes at the beginning that are taken from texts or different sources within the world of the book. So these are not real. My mother,
which is a technique that I love, by the way. I love that technique.
I love it as well. I was like really hoping to do this eventually with some book that I wrote, and it just so happened that it was this one. And I'm like, oh my God, it makes sense, because I was just all of them are just answering questions that my editor had for me, but they were like, oh, this might make the book too bloated, and it might be difficult to integrate it with the action. And I'm like, well, they can be epigraphs. And they were like, oh my God, I love that idea. So, so yes, whenever I'm ready, or whenever we're ready.
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, here we go. All right, let me clear my throat. Here we go. Before the sport of Blaze Wrath was created, the question among witches and wizards remained the same. How can we keep our world a secret from humans who do not possess magic? This question did not have a long-term answer. In 1743, a dragon revealed itself to a regular for the first time in recorded history. The dragon had not intended to disrupt the status quo of the magical community. It had wished to ask that regular a different question. Are you ready to soar? Excerpt from Harleen Corana's A History of Blazewrath Around the World. And now we get into the chapter. Chapter 1. Dragons are better company than people. Not that I hate people, some are okay. People can't fly though. Not with wings strong enough to break the shell of a dragon's egg, which is as hard as steel. Wings that double as weapons. Witches and wizards use fancy metal wands and even fancier potions to get off the ground. So what? Dragons don't need wands or potions. They can just fly. Every 2 years, I watch them fly and fight for the Blazewrath World Cup. No other sporting event is the home of dragon riders and their huge, badass steeds hailing from the 16 countries chosen to compete. Other sports have players who run, but they don't have a runner, the only player without a dragon steed, who has to reach the top of a magically conjured mountain before they're blown away by a fireball or beaten to a pulp. After today, that could be me. For the billionth time, I sort through the stack of pages on my bed. Each one has a header that reads, Puerto Rico Runner Tryouts Application. I reread the first page. Lana Aurelia Torres, age 17. Application accepted. Appointment, July 16, 2017 at 1 p.m. The Ritz-Carlton, Naples, Florida. All candidates must possess an official birth certificate from Puerto Rico. If attending tryouts in the United States, candidates are required to participate in their current state of residence and none other. Previous track and field experience is preferred but not mandatory. Training in martial arts is highly recommended. Today is July 16th. It's been 4 weeks since Blazewrath tryouts officially began. Now they're finally coming to Florida. Puerto Rico's former runner, Brian Santana, got kicked off the team back in April. Getting fired is bad enough, but getting fired before your country plays for the first time ever, I would have cried. Thankfully, Brian's firing led to a broader search for his replacement, this time including Puerto Ricans living in the States. I'd switched from lamenting the loss of my country's runner to celebrating the chance to take his place. I don't have the highly recommended martial arts training, unless watching YouTube videos and hitting imaginary rivals in my bedroom counts. I used to be on my middle school's track and field team, but my grades started slipping, so Mom told me to focus on studying instead. Hopefully, I'm still fast enough to impress the International Blazewrath Federation. There's a knock on my door. Lana, are you all set? Mom asks. I need help with the wrapping paper. Just a sec. Thank God the door is locked. The ruby red shirt and faded denim jeans I'll be wearing to hide my sporty clothes are still laid out next to my tryout documents. Okay, I'll be downstairs. Mom's footsteps echo across the hall. Even though the coast is clear, I rush to put on my shirt and jeans. My brown hair flops all over the place, but after a few frantic brushes, I wrangle it into a decent ponytail. I slip on my black and white Adidas sneakers, the ones I run in every morning. Mom's used to seeing me in them, so she won't find it suspicious I'm wearing them to celebrate my cousin Todd's birthday. Besides, we're taking him to a wand shop. No need to whip out the stilettos and fringe. I do a quick pirouette once I'm dressed. My meeting with the International Blazewrath Federation is in a mere 5 hours. Today I might become the new runner for Team Puerto Rico. I might get picked to rep my beautiful island, the island I haven't visited in 12 years. My smile fades. 12 years is too long to spend away from home, the place where I became myself. Before my Puerto Rican father and my white American mother divorced, we'd lived in the mountains of Calle. I would dash around our 2-story house, its walls decorated in cracked coral paint, pretending to chase after dragons with Papi. He'd let me guide him through the endless greenery outside and the sloping, pothole-ridden roads. Our neighbors would catch me with notepads and purple pens, jotting down clues that would take me to the dragon's lair. There hadn't been Sol de Noche dragons in Puerto Rico then. There was just a father and his only child, their feet running as fast as their imaginations. Our imaginations were never as exciting as Blaze Wrath. The Cup takes place in a different country every 2 years. I was only 4 when Bobby let me watch my first tournament. He rearranged the furniture in our too-hot living room, barefoot and belting 80s rock songs, the windows open and the ceiling fan blasting. He demonstrated in theatrical lunges what the runner has to do on the mountain and explained the offensive tactics each team's dragons could do. 2 things engraved themselves in my heart: the way my father's face lit up whenever a match started, and how I desperately craved to be part of the matches myself. Puerto Rico made me who I am, but Blaze Wrath is the reason I was born. It's my purpose in a life without my island, a life without my father, who's currently living in Brazil. He doesn't know I'm trying out. If I get picked for Team Puerto Rico, it'll be the best surprise of his life. If nothing happens, he'll never know what a disappointment I was to us both. I grabbed the Whisperer on my dresser. It looks like a red sports watch and fits my wrist like a charm. I press the silver adjust button. Samira, can you hear me? Affirmative. What's up? She says. Tupac's Keep Ya Head Up blasts in the background. This Whisperer has way better sound than my phone. Thanks to magic, it lets me communicate with anyone from anywhere. I'm not a witch, but being best friends with one has its perks. Just wanted to make sure the private wand-making tour is still happening, I say. Yup, I called the store again to confirm. I'll distract everyone while you sneak out for Blaze Wrath tryouts. I've already left my car in the store parking lot, so I'll slip you my keys. Then you act your booty off to convince your mom you're sick and can sit the private tour out. I'm smiling wide again. I owe you big time, Samira. Make it onto the team. Or you could let me transport to your house. You're not setting yourself on fire today. She gives me one of her Olympic gold medal winning sighs. That fire doesn't actually burn, Lana. Stop being extra. Also, I can get rid of it faster than before. Now I'm the one who sighs. Samira's a great BFF, but when it comes to being a great witch, she's still a work in progress. She's not magically strong enough to perform complex spells, including the transport charm, which moves anything from one place to another. Her original plan was to transport me straight to the Ritz-Carlton, but the last time she tried the spell, I was caged in blue flames for 2 hours. The flames didn't hurt me, but 2 hours? Come on. And since mom's an OBGYN, she's always on call from the hospital. Her car is off limits. Not that she'd ever lend it to me for this. We stick to my mother picking you up, I say. It's a lot safer. Fine, let's do it your boring way. I can picture her pouting in disappointment. See you in an hour, Captain. Again, I owe you. How about you admit Law & Order is the best show on television? Ugh, not this nonsense again. Goodbye, Samira. I tuck the tryout documents into my Wonder Woman backpack. It has this vintage-looking gold medal badge on it, which is shaped like the W on Diana's uniform. It makes me want to punch bad guys. Besides, Papi bought it for me last Christmas, so it'll give me some luck. My phone's wallpaper fills the lock screen. It's a picture of Takeshi Endo, my favorite Blaze Wrath player. 2 years ago, a 15-year-old Takeshi had been ready to represent Japan for the second time as his team's striker. This photo is from a shoot without Hikaru, his dragon steed. He's in a brightly lit studio wearing a simple white t-shirt and skinny jeans as black as his slicked back hair. One of his sleeves is rolled up, exposing a lean bicep. He's been missing for 2 years. No one has seen him since Hikaru's murder. Wish me luck, Takeshi. And that's it.
There we go. It's so I love like hearing this. For me, it's the second time. And what I love about this is that in general, what stood out to me about your first chapter here is how I don't know what it's called, but like you're signposting pretty much
Oh,
everything that
right.
happens in the book in the first chapter. Like, and I'm not going to say what is what because people should read the book.
Oh,
But it's definitely I noticed it even like when I got to the end of the book and like was thinking about the beginning and I'm like, oh, that was great. That's what we all should be
oh,
doing.
thank you very, very much. It was really interesting because I kept going back to that beginning while I was drafting
Mm-hmm.
it. I wrote this book
Mm-hmm.
in 12 months, like the first draft in 12 months, literally a year. And
Mm-hmm.
then revising it took a long time because I had no outline.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Mm-hmm.
wrote it from my heart and head. Well, mostly my heart, no
Mm-hmm.
head was involved. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely no logical thinking was involved in the
Mm-hmm.
plotting of this book at first. And then as I reshaped it into something that was publishable, I felt like that
Mm-hmm.
first chapter was an opportunity to integrate a lot because it is a new
Mm-hmm.
world, even though it's our world. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy that you say that because it stresses me out sometimes thinking about someone picking up that book and not knowing anything about the book and just reading it. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
what is going on here?
I think it works really well. And of course, also, I'm a fantasy reader. I read all kinds of things. So it's like some level of world building is obviously, expected and anticipated in the first chapter. But wow, we have been at this for almost 2 hours. This might be my longest episode.
That's okay. It's
Um,
Puerto Rican rights.
it, listen, we're about to have another conversation about how it takes 3 hours to leave a party
Oh yes. Oh
because
yes. I had this.
um,
I talked about this in a live stream with a Mexican American author, Johnny Garzavilla.
mhm,
Everyone should read their
mhm,
book, 1,500 Miles from the Sun.
mhm.
But yes, we were talking about like, oh, I was trying to end the stream and they kept talking, and I was like, I love talking to Johnny, but I was like, now we're ending the stream. It took us a long time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I was there for that
Oh
stream and
yes, yes, you
I
were.
was just laughing because
It
it
was
was
really Latinx. Like we were really
I,
being our
we
stereotypical
didn't even
selves.
get into oh my gosh, we didn't even get into the joke about like the Latin
Yeah,
experience when we were talking about Catholicism and Gregorian chants before.
right.
I didn't even get to make that joke in this podcast, but now I just did, except, really, really poorly.
Yes,
Um,
yes, absolutely,
yeah, and
absolutely.
Encuentros Latinx is all about the Latin experience, so
Yeah,
you can expect which is it's even funnier because in a UCC context, United Church of Christ, it's a very mainline Protestant
right.
denomination. So a lot of churches actually are like all about those
Yes,
hymns,
yes. They're all
and
about them.
which I mean I love a lot of hymns and Gregorian chants. Legitimately are like really
They're
cool.
amazing. I love them.
But
Yeah, no, they're super. They can be very chilling, but also very
hmm
soothing. So it just depends on
hmm
what you're listening to and how you feel before you listen to
yeah,
it.
yeah. Absolutely. Well, where can people keep up with you and your work?
Well, right now I have Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and I have my own YouTube channel, as Taylor mentioned. My Twitter and Instagram handles are both at Amparo underscore Ortiz. My TikTok is at Amparo underscore Ortiz underscore author. And my YouTube channel, you can just find me as Amparo Ortiz. And I haven't been posting regularly on my channel. I'm taking the summer off from streaming as well because I really want to finish
Mhm,
this book that I'm reading right now.
mhm,
But I hope to have a video soon with some details about something. And you can
cool,
expect that like no later than August, like mid-August.
cool,
So I'm excited
cool,
about that. And then streaming will resume in October, just in time for Dragon Bullet Ring to hit shelves.
cool. Which remind us of the date again.
October 12th.
October.
Yes, it's a
Great,
Tuesday. So
great. Tuesday. Yeah,
yes,
as all traditional publishing
yes,
is
yes, yes.
on a
It's
Tuesday.
on a Tuesday.
Um, yes, yes, you can pre-order it
Oh
now,
yes, it is
folks.
available.
Pretty much,
Yeah, and
yeah.
keep those receipts if you do pre-order. I haven't announced my giveaway campaign yet, but there will be one. And signed copies will be available from my local indie, but we haven't set that up yet. So I'm like speaking before we have confirmation from them. But yeah, I'm
Right.
assuming we will get those to you soon. Yeah.
Very,
Yay!
very cool. Well, Amparo, thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
Taylor.
this
It's
conversation.
awesome to finally meet you, you know.
Yes, yes. I've been trolling Amparo's mentions on her YouTube channel for
It's not trolling if it's true. So,
well, yes, it is. And maybe one day, we'll just cat person each other, and it'll be funny instead of
yeah,
awkward.
instead of being wildly uncomfortable for the other person. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed for them. But yeah.
Well, that's a great way
to embarrassment and shame.
That's a great way to wrap the podcast.
Yay!
Once again, thank you so much. And I imagine that maybe for a lot of people this might be the first time you're encountering me or encountering Encuentros Latinx. So this is a monthly podcast where I talk with and also about, but just a different Latinx person each month, and we talk about spirituality, religion, whatever work that they're doing in the world. It's always a unique conversation because every individual is unique and special. So check us out, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, other places that podcasts exist, and leave reviews and ratings. And through that you can find my own social media and author stuff. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks again, Amparo.
Yay!
And read about some Latinx dragons in a couple months.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening to today's show. Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this. On behalf of Encuentros Latinx, we hope you'll join us on our next Encuentro.